Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, January 28th, 2022, and today we are going to be talking about the Republican primary in 2024 and how a new poll from Echelon Insights shows that Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump, when faced up against each other, show a pretty competitive race for a former president. Now, Donald Trump being ahead by 25 percentage points isn't enough to say that the race is going to be close, and truly, I don't think that it will be, at least right now. The one thing that I do want to say, though, is that as a sitting president, you should be performing to a much higher level than you currently are. I think that Donald Trump definitely needs to improve, considering the fact that about 32% of Republican primary voters, when he was previously up 60, 70, 80% in data from just over a year ago, right after he had lost the election, the fact that he has decreased to this point is worrisome. The fact that he is only ahead of a governor of the state of Florida by 25 percentage points as the two-time nominee for the GOP, who is very clearly adored by the party, is something to consider as a real bad look for Donald Trump, because being at 57% isn't the worst thing. He can absolutely win a primary with less than 57%, and if more than the two run, meaning more than Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump, you are probably still going to see Donald Trump win, regardless of what that percentage is, as long as he wins a plurality. That's the way the Republican primary works. It isn't proportional in every state. Some states are winner take all. For instance, in the state of Florida, Donald Trump won there against Marco Rubio and won every single one of the delegates because it was a winner take all state. Another state like that is the state of South Carolina. Though Donald Trump didn't win by a significant amount, it was a winner take all system, and it propped him ahead with 50 delegates, with him getting 33% of the vote. Less than that, actually, which means that with just less than one-third of the entire delegation of Republican primary voters in South Carolina voting for you, he was still able to win all of their delegates. So a plurality victory isn't out of consideration, considering that Donald Trump did it in 2016. But in a one-on-one race, what you would expect is that Donald Trump would be able to carry this amount of energy and enthusiasm towards him throughout any type of one-on-one matchup, regardless of who he was running against. I mean, Ron DeSantis in many ways embodies President Trump in the way that he governs in the state of Florida, in the way that he, stands on political issues. And, a lot of the time you saw the two work hand in hand in order to win the state of Florida in the 2020 election, and often refer to each other as, in positive lights. But the fact that Ron DeSantis, someone who got a lot of his governing style and personality from President Trump, at least in the office of the governor, in terms of what we've seen, or maybe he was like that as a House of Representatives member. But the point is that with Ron DeSantis being a near embodiment of President Trump, just a little bit less outspoken and a little bit more politically correct, he is getting 32% of the vote against Donald Trump, who is just the 2020 Republican nominee for president, who has been riding on this idea that the 2020 election was stolen from him. And thus, people think that he deserves another shot at the presidency, at least on the Republican side. Now, numbers weren't always bad like this for Donald Trump. In fact, I wouldn't argue that these are necessarily bad, but they definitely are worse than before. When you take a look at the preliminary election data from the Republican primary back in the early stages of the campaign season, one thing that you might find is that immediately following the election, people weren't so sure, about who was going to run. If it was going to be Donald Trump, they were all for him, and when faced up against other candidates, Donald Trump decimated every single one of them. Now take a look at this column. This is Ron DeSantis' column. This is the third in terms of the number of candidates here. And what you will find is that in preliminary numbers, he was not even in preliminary polls, he was not even considered a potential nominee for the GOP. I mean, what you found was that he was not a top name. And when polled, he would only get 2%, 1%, 2%, 4%. Up until, more recently, around the early 2021 ranges, is when Ron DeSantis started to gain just slightly a good amount of traction. He went from 4% to 7, to 9, to 7, to 8, to 8. And then, more recently, around the summer of 2021, Ron DeSantis tremendously grew in popularity. The news was covering him with COVID-19 in the state. He was lessening restrictions significantly, as if he hasn't already done it, going to the full extent and making a name for himself on the national numbers. And then he started to rise. He went to 13%. He went to 19%. He went to 13%. In a one-on-one race back in July, he was only losing to President Trump by a margin here of about 17 percentage points. Well, we'll talk about that poll in just a moment, because, when you talk about the rise in power that you saw for Ron DeSantis and the rise in political relevance and media relevance, you find that the reason why he's now now included in polls is because his name is a super recognizable Republican name. But in all of the polls considered altogether, you will find that the numbers are pretty consistently double digits, sometimes 20%, a low of 13. One time he was at 7. I don't know how much I actually agree with that. I don't think that that number truly is accurate compared to the rest of the numbers that have been released. I mean, you don't go from 18, 10, 21 down to 7, and then immediately following 3 days later, pop back up at 15 to 20 to 19. I mean, it makes more sense if it was around that range, but since it wasn't double digits, I wouldn't say that this one is definitely, the truth sayer out of all of them. It probably is just an outlier. But in looking at these polls, I mean, you can see the very clear rise for Ron DeSantis, and it gets better for Ron DeSantis when you consider the polls without President Trump. Immediately following the 2020 election, what you will find is that Mike Pence was immediately looked at as the potential nominee for the Republican Party, and it made sense. He was the vice president, and he served under President Trump, and he was probably one of the closest people that was to Donald Trump. He was actually, at some point, neck and neck with Donald Trump Jr., and that simply is because, people were looking to another Donald Trump, and if Donald Trump Jr. was there, they were going to choose him over Mike Pence. But Ron DeSantis actually started out in those polls without President Trump, hovering in single digits. I mean, he was at 1, 2, 3, 4%. He wasn't doing super well. And then all of a sudden came that sudden surge in early 2021, and it only rose from there. There were a few hiccups where he dipped in terms of overall the amount of people that wanted him to be the 2024 nominee if Donald Trump was not to run. But right now, he goes ahead of the former vice president. He goes ahead of Senator Ted Cruz. He goes ahead of Donald Trump Jr., of Nikki Haley, of Mitt Romney, Marco Rubio. I mean, the amount of people that Ron DeSantis, as the governor of Florida, who didn't exactly have a landslide victory in 2018, are defeating simply because of the way he's governing, and the name, statewide and nationwide recognition he has built for himself is quite impressive, to say the least. And now that he, in polls against President Trump, is practically in a position where he isn't losing by a substantial amount. 25%, yes, I understand. That seems to be bad. But Ron DeSantis just a year ago was in a position where he was starting to perk up, but was still only in single digits. And that's the real concern here, I think, that Donald Trump should realize. Because Ron DeSantis still has a year and a half more until he officially needs to announce. And if he is able to keep this trajectory, going from 1, 2, 3% to potentially being in a one-on-one race with President Trump, getting a third of the Republican electorate already, with Donald Trump just getting 57%, leaving a significant amount of undecided voters, that could prop up Ron DeSantis's candidacy to 43%. And even if he was to lose this Republican primary, it would definitely prepare him for a future presidential bid. Because Ron DeSantis is young and Donald Trump isn't. And the fact that Ron DeSantis has an opportunity now, if Donald Trump does not win, to win this Republican nomination, I honestly see no reason why he shouldn't take it. There have been presidents who have lost elections before and returned 8 years later, and I think Ron DeSantis could very well do that if he loses the 2024 presidential election. I mean, if Donald Trump decides not to run, who are they going to turn to? Mike Pence probably won't run, and that will leave and pave the way for someone like Ted Cruz, Donald Trump Jr., Mitt Romney, Nikki Haley, but Ron DeSantis knows he would practically have it in the bag. Even when you take a look at the betting odds where they consider Donald Trump as a potential candidate here, what you find is that Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis aren't too far off in terms of the odds. People are either saying Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis. Over 2/3 of this market here is between the two, and the rest are dispersed between some very top names that were very recognizable before Ron DeSantis even rose to the office of governor in the state of Florida. I mean, you had Nikki Haley, right? You had Mike Pence, Tim Scott, Mike Pompeo, Kristi Noem, Ted Cruz. These are people who are very recognizable names: senators, vice presidents, former representatives, governors, UN ambassadors. You have some very high-end names here, yet all of them are trounced heavily by the governor of the state of Florida. And I will say that Ron DeSantis also, I think, offers some type of political advantage in the state of Florida that might be enticing for voters. Now, the average American probably doesn't know all of the swing states. When we take a look at our key swing states, we talk about states such as Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Texas, Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, Virginia, Ohio, Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, New Hampshire. Not every single person in the country is going to know all of these states. They might follow them closely on election night, but if you were to say, list all of the swing states, or at least list 3 to 4, you probably won't be able to find that the average American can do that. But one state in specific has been the topic of discussion for quite some time now after the 2000 election with the Supreme Court decision, and a lot of consideration about whether or not, this state is going to be competitive. But the state of Florida definitely is always closely watched. Every election, no matter what type, Senate election, governor election, presidential election, Florida is always the bellwether state. It is always a state where you are looking at how it's going to go and whether or not, whoever wins it, what that means for that political party. And in 2024, Florida is definitely a state that is going to be super important. It is worth more now than ever. It is the third largest state by electoral votes. Previously, it was tied with New York. Now it defeats New York by 2 electoral votes. So you have California, which is 54. You have Texas, which is 40, and Florida, which is 30. And the fact that Democrats are competitive in both Texas and Florida at this point is quite alarming, I think, to the GOP. But a reason why they would want to choose Ron DeSantis. Because with 228 key swing states, the Democrats probably have a few locked down. Arguably speaking, Democrats are probably going to win Colorado, New Mexico, and Virginia regardless, and Minnesota regardless of who the Republican nominee is going to be. That's not a guarantee, and that's just a very early estimation, and it could very well be wrong at the end of the day. But there is something to be said about the Democratic Party's resiliency in these states and ability to win here over multiple elections that didn't go their way, such as 2016, or elections that did go their way, such as 2020. Iowa and Ohio could very well go to the GOP as well, and you come to this point where we're reduced down to 167 key electoral votes that are swing. You have also probably 168, considering that we probably know how Maine's 2nd congressional district is going to go. But for the rest of these, they are really hard to determine, and a lot of money is spent there. One of the states where the most money is spent, and where the most money was spent in the state, any swing state in the 2020 election cycle, was the state of Florida. When you take a look at the statewide totals that we found in the state of Florida, you find that Donald Trump spent $69 million. Joe Biden spent $49 million. Another thing that I think is very interesting, when you take a look at the summary of this entire election cycle, what you will find in terms of contributions, in total, in terms of what was taken out and spent in the state of Florida, there's just a significant amount of money. I mean, it honestly is quite shocking to see just how much money is in the state of Florida and how much money is being spent in the state as well. I mean, you're talking about nearly $1 billion spent across all of these swing states, and the 2020 election was the most expensive cycle following the most expensive cycle. I mean, what you found was that while fundraising records were maintained from 2008 through 2012 and 2016, they were completely demolished in 2020, and the spending records have only begun to increase. American elections cost a lot more now than they did before, and the state of Florida almost always gets a lot of that money. If Republicans weren't spending as much money in the state of Florida, they have a reason to shift to other states. If Ron DeSantis was to remain popular and after winning the governorship in 2022, continue on to 2024, make the argument to the state of Florida that he will do just as a good job in the Oval Office, he could very well lock down that state and prevent the Democratic Party from even being as competitive as they have been in the past. I mean, seeing the fact that Florida went more to the right in 2020 than it did in 2016 is a testament that Republicans can still win in Florida even if they lose the presidential map, and that Florida is very accustomed to voting for the Republican Party. If Ron DeSantis can lock this down, what this effectively does is, yes, remove a state that Democrats have to spend a lot of money on, but also remove a state that Republicans have to spend a lot of money on. And if we're being completely honest, Democrats almost always need to spend more money in states in order to win them, and Republicans just need to spend less. And if they don't need to worry about a state as heavily, Democrats might end up wasting money in the state of Florida, and then, consequently, what you will find is that the state itself, is going to be just a money sink for the Democratic Party. They might spend $200 to $300 million in the state of Florida, but to no avail, because if Ron DeSantis is running, he's more than likely going to win the state. So in reducing the amount of swing states, he becomes an electable type of candidate for the 2024 election, which is why he might be so appealing to Republican primary voters. They know where he comes from, they know his popularity, and they know how he governs, and they know that it is very similar to President Trump. But also there is that consideration that maybe they just like him because he's not necessarily more electable in their eyes, because maybe they think Donald Trump won the 2020 election and that it is an election that he can absolutely win in 2024, considering that Biden is now unpopular. But maybe it's a youthful voice. Maybe it's the fact that Ron DeSantis, while being nearly an embodiment of President Trump, also offers the fact that he has more political experience technically, and also is able to be, that youth representation in this Republican Party, and a change from what we have known for the presidential office for quite some time now. I mean, an older white man is the standard that we have had and set in this nation in terms of our president. And while, I don't think that there is going to be a consideration of race in the Republican primary, but I do think there is going to be a consideration of age. And if you find that that health argument and that old age argument is going to be used against Joe Biden and Donald Trump ends up winning that nomination, it won't be a usable argument. That's why it fell in 2020. That's why it wasn't an argument that was usable across swing states. Health was not a major concern like it was for Hillary Clinton in 2016, for Joe Biden in 2020, because both Donald Trump and Joe Biden were old, and that made it different. But for Ron DeSantis, he could offer all of the same policy ideas, all of the same issue stances, all of the same, everything the same, the governing style, the campaign style as Donald Trump, just he offers it in a more youthful way and also provides some type of electoral advantage in the state of Florida, considering that he originally hails from the state and is a pretty popular governor at this point in time for a swing state Republican. So what I think at this point is that Republican primary voters are starting to realize that maybe Donald Trump isn't the most electable candidate, or even if they do, they might be more inclined to vote for Ron DeSantis for a number of various reasons, and they might end up choosing him in 2024 in a one-on-one race against President Trump, which would end up being an extremely competitive primary if this trend continues, as it has over the past year. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.